Some breaking news coming into the newsroom, a questionable political ad being played over the air during prime time. We've got TJ Carpenter, the basis and the subject of this political ad, here to talk about his ad. TJ, you aired this 30-second ad during prime time in the middle of a Razorback football game. It has some suggestive material that implied that you were the best candidate for the job. Can you kind of explain what this ad meant and what it means for you and your political campaign?
Well, first of all, John, thank you very much for having me on your show and allowing me to express my views on this matter. I know that the ad may have been offensive to some, but I feel like the views in the ad are very indicative of how most people view this America. And just because some people may have been offended by the subject matter does not mean that the views in the ad were incorrect or that they should not be expressed. A lot of people want to know the issues in this election, and they're not allowed to be expressed, or they're not allowed to see the issues in this ad unless ads like these ones are allowed to be put on television for a broad audience.
Yeah, TJ, a lot of people are questioning the timing of your ad and the time of day that it occurred. It was right in the middle of a Razorback football game, which a lot of people obviously are viewing, and obviously for you that's good, but with the content that it was in there, I mean, is the timing perfect for that?
Well, I feel like parents are really in charge of what their children do and do not see, and they understand how to explain it to their own families. We don't want the government stepping in and choosing what people can and cannot view. This is a free country, and those parents should be allowed to see those things, and they can understand those issues, and they can also, for themselves, explain them to their own children.
We are going to bring in, we do have some people in our studio. We have actually a concerned parent who is actually watching the game at that time with her children. Kelly Carpenter is in studio with us. Kelly, can you kind of talk about, you know, what happened when you saw the ad and what exactly went through your mind when you saw that?
Well, basically, I was with my son, who is 10 years old, and we were watching the Razorback football game, and this ad came on that was very sexually suggestive and just quite frankly inappropriate. It had inappropriate material that I would not like for my child to see. Well, the first thing that came into my mind was when the FCC versus Pacific Foundation case, which in this case, a radio station aired a political satire, and it had very inappropriate sexual references in it. And the FCC, well, the court ruled that the FCC can sanction the broadcasting station for broadcasting inappropriate things.
Well, you know what I would say to that is that the Federal Communications Act 315 also makes sure that broadcasters are immune from what political candidates say. Now, I'm very happy that the television station chose to air my ad because it's what people want to see. People want to know about these issues. People care about these issues. Now, this is not necessarily what I would consider an attack ad. This is something that comes out and it shows the delineation between some candidates out there who may do some things that most Americans find incredibly inappropriate, and myself. Who would you rather have in the White House? Somebody like me, for family values, or some of these other candidates out there?
Yeah, TJ, you talk about the broadcaster immunity that goes along with this, and we actually have our station manager in there as well, Emily Fitzgerald, who's in the studio with us, to talk about what went through the decision process to air this ad. And Emily, didn't we give the other opponent the ample amount of time to get an ad in as well?
I'm just going to read what the law says so that way you will know exactly what went into the decision process of deciding to air this ad. All broadcast stations must give each candidate an equal opportunity to purchase ad time, which we must play during prime time, which is why this ad was played during the Razorback game, because it occurred during the prime time hours. During these ads, we have no right to impose censorship over any material that is presented inside these ads, as long as it's within 60 days of the election for the presidential debate, or for the presidential election, which this is.
Okay, TJ, what's your response to that? You know, talking about what the way they went through this whole thing.
Well, I think she's exactly right. And when we talk about safe harbor hours, those are hours in which most people are in their beds. And while I understand that that's when children are mostly asleep and most Americans are mostly asleep, how can somebody adequately be prepared to run for president if they don't feel that their message and they can't distinguish themselves from other candidates without being put in prime time in front of a national audience, and in fact an audience here, right here in the state of Arkansas?
Yes, Mr. Carpenter, you know, this is very close to the election. We are about 2 weeks away, and as the recent polls have come out, they show you are quite behind. Could this actually have been an act out of desperation for you?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as an act of desperation, but we feel like that the media hasn't really been able to accurately portray myself as a candidate and our message of what we would bring to the office. And so we felt like this last surge would really bring a great deal of importance and a great deal of our core base voters out into the election so that we could get a strong showing in the polls come here this fall.
Now we're going to bring in one more person on our panel, Megan McLeod, who is our political expert here in the studio. Megan, can you kind of talk about what the court ruling should be, or what exactly do you think will happen as far as this issue goes?
Well, if one were to do their research, they would find that this happens very often in political campaigns. And if I were a judge and I was making the decision, I would say that the television station is in the right because they did not feel that an injunction was needed because they gave equal opportunity to both political advertisements.
And Ms. Fitzgerald, the station manager, do you agree or disagree with what she thinks about that?
I completely agree. Both candidates purchased ads and they were both played during prime time. The content of the ads is not of our concern.
And we'll go back to you, Mr. Carpenter. Do you agree or disagree with what you think the court ruling, or at least what our political expert says about that?
Well, I think your political expert is exactly right. In fact, she's talked about the broadcasting station sometimes wanting an injunction like in the Becker versus Gillette-Com case. And the fact that the broadcasting company in this instance did not feel like an injunction was needed is because an injunction wasn't needed. The content of this ad is something that people really need to see, and they needed to see it in prime time. And they wanted to do me due justice, and I'm very happy that they did. And I hope that all the voters out there come out this fall to support me.
And Mr. Carpenter, I personally want to bring up one more issue, or at least one more case that kind of deals with the exact same thing, and it was the complaint filed by the Atlanta NAACP concerning J.B. Stoner back in the 1970s about his political campaign when he was running for senator in the state of Georgia. Now, his ad was on the radio, and it was basically very racially biased, and you could easily hear that as well toward blacks, as he was a white senator, and it was a very pro-white ad. But the ruling was by the court saying that this ad could be played as long as there was no clear and present danger made towards the person in question. Now, there's really not been any danger made towards your opponent, but there's still a chance that that could happen. You know, what is your take?
Well, you know, I don't really feel like there's a whole lot of racial impetus on what's coming through in this ad in particular. Now, there are some very shocking issues that come up with some of my opponents, and that's not my fault, that's not on me, that's not on the American people. What happens in the privacy of their own homes and what they choose to decide when hearing about some of the shocking things that some of my opponents have done, then they should decide for themselves what is actually supposed to happen. But I do feel like I personally, and this ad in particular, have not put any people in danger.
All right, Mr. Carpenter, and you got anything else to say, at least towards our panel, or at least towards your opponent as well?
No, I would just like them all to come out during Election Day and support me in my run for presidency.
All right, Mr. Carpenter, we thank you for joining us, as well as our panel, Ms. Fitzgerald, Ms. McLeod, and Ms. Carpenter. Appreciate you coming in our studio for today's news. We'll be right back with more on this story when we come back.